Hi guys, welcome back. XUK here. Sitting here on a cold, grey, miserable, supposedly sunny summer day here in Blighty. I thought, what can I do? I know I shall review one of my favourite, if not the favourite, role-playing games of all time. That would be Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who was a fairly prolific horror writer in the 20s and 30s. His writings are a kind of, the best way I've heard it put is existential horror. It went beyond the idea of ghosts and vampires and zombies and stuff that existed at the time, and he built up this entire mythos, not intentionally, but he did it, of ancient alien beings from other worlds and other dimensions, and their machinations and cults and so forth. And he got his fellow writers to expand upon it, and it has grown and grown and grown in, like, you know, almost 100 years since he started it. And this particular game is published by Chaosium. This is the 6th edition rules. I'm not quite sure what the cover of the current one is, or even if it's up to 7th or 8th. But it does have one benefit in that every edition is pretty much the same. Unlike most RPGs, which seem to change editions and what have you, this one actually basically just builds upon itself every time. So it doesn't matter which version you get, but I recommend getting the full one. Okay, the idea is that characters in this one portray investigators of the strange and mysterious. And as they go through, they will encounter things that will unhinge their minds or scare them witless, or just turn them into a red gooey paste across the wall. It's one of those games where it's best to play it in the right condition, at night, candles, so forth, to get the real atmosphere. If you don't get the atmosphere, then you're losing it. But before I get into that sort of stuff, let's give you a basic rundown. The system itself is very, very simple. If you don't know how Chaosium do things, you'll be probably being all surprised. Essentially, you create a character, you roll a set of D6s for the stats. Most of them are a 3D6 roll, but there are 3 which require slightly different. For example, your size and education are 2 dice plus 6, and your education is 3d6 plus 3. That's one of the only things where some people I know have a grumble. They would rather have some means of using a points buy system in this game to be able to play the sort of character they really want. But I personally am more of the old school, where I say, you know, roll your stats dynamic and work your character from there. Cthulhu isn't the sort of game where you need, it's not like D&D where you go, right, you two are the fighters, you play a rogue, I'm going to be the cleric, you be the wizard. You don't really need a balanced party in this, because, you know, you're ordinary people. You're not superheroes, you're not guys with swords, or you know space marines or anything like that. You are playing everyday man and woman in the street. But I'm sure there's ways around that if people wanted to do it. And then basically you choose a profession, and there are 24 in here, which range from things like artist, author, clergyman, lawyer, parapsychologist, police detective, professor, private detective. You know, did I mention private detective? You know, whatever you can kind of come up with for the time. I mean, the default game is 1920, so I should point that out briefly. What you can come up with, fine. And essentially it gives you a series of skills. You get points based on your stats to spend on class skills, and then you get points based off your intelligence to spend on other stuff, which is what you do outside of work, sort of thing. And that's pretty much it. The basic character generation doesn't require you to have feats. It doesn't have weird powers. You are basically playing a set of you're basically playing a character where dice rolls are all made on a D100. All your skills basically go from 1 to up. Everybody, barring 2 particular skills, although one of them actually isn't in the rulebook, called the Cthulhu Mythos knowledge, basically, and in the Dreamland supplement you get Dream Lore, dreaming, so it's 3 skills in fact. Otherwise, every skill starts at 1%, because everybody can possibly do a bit of everything, or they know something, even if it's, you know, you've just heard something on nuclear physics or whatever. And then you basically roll D100, and if you get your percentage or less, you'll be successful. The greater the percentage, the greater the chance that your GM, called a keeper in this, will give you, a better response or what have you. And most of the rules in here are pretty much covered in the first, let's say, 70 to 80 pages. The rest of the book, which is fairly chunky, is rules for magic, because although this sort of horror is based more on, it's not actual gods or anything like that. It's, magic is science. It's just a different science than what we understand. Magic does exist. There's a fairly comprehensive rules for sanity, because slowly as your mind goes, be it encountering things that man should not know or seeing things that can't possibly exist in our reality, it slowly drives you mad. And generally you can find that if you play a campaign, generally your character will begin this slide into madness, assuming that they don't die off in some horrible manner. You also get a number of the mythos tomes that are mentioned in the various stories and novels that have been published, such as the Necronomicon or the Coptic manuscripts or the Book of Iban. There's a nice rundown of what is the Cthulhu mythos for the GM. There's a nice bit of background on Lovecraft himself. You get a couple of scenarios in here, one of which, two actually, tell a lie, are really, really good, and the third one is a bit pants, to be fair. Shouldn't say that. Yes, you've got, where are we? You've got The Haunting, which has been in the rulebook since the very first edition, which is a great scenario to start people off with, although you might, if you're you might need to tweak it in some way, depending on whether you're a new GM or whether you're an experienced GM but you've not played Cthulhu before. And you've got The Edge of Madness, which I actually think is an even better introduction. It is usually the one I use to start off fresh campaigns with new players. Other than that, you have a nice section of monsters. There is a kind of bestiary, though bear in mind this isn't D&D, so it's not a case of you'll find a ghoul in one room and a deep one in another and a wizard in another. It doesn't work like that. This is set in the real world, as it were, but it does give you stats for some of the more major entities and the creatures more likely to be encountered. Now I will throw in here that Lovecraft's work, and generally the stories themselves in the novels and short stories, are quite nihilistic in a way. Lovecraft himself wasn't a believer in any faith. It was a case of we're here and that's it. And that does kind of come across, because in this it's kind of like mankind is a speck in the universe and he's nothing. And basically if we spend too much time looking at what science can tell us, we'll all go mad, fleeing, as he puts it, into the safety of a new dark age. And that sort of stuff is fantastic when you read the literature, when you read the stories and what have you. It really gives you a feel. The problem is that in a role-play game that gets old fairly fast. And to be fair, it's very difficult to convey it in a role-playing game. I don't care how good a GM you are going to have trouble conveying this on a regular occasion, because Call of Cthulhu does work quite well as a standalone game. You're going to run something for Halloween or a one-off on a Saturday night or whatever, but it can work well as a campaign. And the problem is trying to get that across in a campaign is a little bit of a pain. It doesn't really work as a set. Now what I do and what I would recommend is I don't run it like Lovecraft's stories do. I try something a bit more film noir. I'm sure you've all seen at some point some of these old black and white detective movies. It's the single light bulb hanging from the cable in the ceiling. It's someone peering through the shutters. It's the femme fatale and the streetwise private eye. Some gangsters strolling in. That sort of thing is probably how I prefer to run the game. Not private eyes and gangsters, or whatever, but that sort of feel to come across. Get that sort of archetypal 1920s prohibition, or not quite. It's difficult to put it. That sort of feel. You can, and I have run the game in the style of the Mummy films, you know, a bit more action with some comedy. I don't recommend that. It was great for a one-off, but you can kind of do that as a change of pace. But I would recommend research film noir, look into that, try and run your games in that style. Don't necessarily try and kill off the characters. You know, because obviously in any game, as a GM, you want your characters to survive, you want your players to have fun over time, and if they just die off all the time, are killed off, I say, you know, make a nice easy game of it. Now, that aside, all you need to play the game or run the game is the rulebook. This contains everything for the GM, this contains everything for the players. That's all you need if you want it. But there are 3 books I would recommend hunting down if possible. There have been numerous books for Call of Cthulhu over the last, 30 years. But I recommend hunting these down. The first one, now you might have to look for this on eBay because I'm pretty sure this was never reprinted from the early 90s. But the 1920s Investigator's Companion Volume 2. Volume 1 was kind of like a background thing. It gave you costs for basic equipment. I mean, that's already in the rulebook, but this gave you a bit more detail. It gave you gun laws, how prohibition worked, laws, and so on in America. What this book does is this takes the idea of the profession, the class you're going to be basically, and gives you, I don't know, 100 of them or so. Accountant, you know, some of them are quite odd. You know, you've got accountant, golf pro, grave digger, actor, stagehand, spy, taxi driver, zookeeper. It just gives you a huge run of possible ideas that aren't just the standard, oh, I'm a private detective, he's a professor of antiquity, doctor, psychologist, whatever. Gives you a nice run. I mean, using this, I played a rabbi in one game, which was rather cool. You know, so that's one of the books I recommend hunting down. The Investigator's Companion Volume 2, New Occupations and Skills. The second book I recommend hunting down is the Malleus Monstrorum. This is basically a giant bestiary. This is all the monsters that are in the rulebook. It's all the monsters, or pretty much all the monsters from, I would say, 90% of all the books that have been published from Call of Cthulhu, all in one place. It's a number of extra ones that have been added. You've got like extra avatars of some of the gods, especially the yog-sothoth. You will never run out of ideas using this book. It is awesome. Now, I don't know whether this has been reprinted. I mean, I picked this up 5 or 6 years ago. It's awesome. I really recommend hunting down that one if you're going to run a game of Call of Cthulhu. Lastly, hunt this bad boy down. This is the complete Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign for the 1920s. This is awesome. They have published in the past, in the 80s, a number of campaigns, Shadows of Yog-sothoth, Masks of Nyarlathotep, Spawn of Azathoth, but all the other ones are a little bit... It's almost like whoever wrote them didn't really understand the mythos and didn't understand how you would write a Call of Cthulhu campaign. Whereas this is spot on. It starts off, without going into any spoilers, it starts off with characters investigating the murder of a friend, and then it leads them on a globe-trotting campaign around the world to thwart the machinations of the Ancient Ones. It is very well written. It comes with everything you need. There's maps, handouts, a nice detailed background to the whole thing, so you can easily work out what needs to happen or how your players' actions will affect the outcomes. There's some side scenarios in here as well, which are really, really good if you want to use them. It is awesome. A couple other books which you'll perhaps get a side mention. H.P. Lovecraft's Dreamlands gives you that strange dimension of dream and sleep if you want to include that in your games. Now, not everybody does. I'm not a big fan of the Dreamland stuff. I use it sparingly in my games, but you might like it, and it's a very good book again. There is a series of books called the Lovecraft Country series, which is Arkham Unveiled, which is basically a rather good source book for the town of Arkham, which is where Lovecraft centred the majority of his stories. You have a source book for Dunwich, or Dunwich, depending whether you're American or British. There's a book for Kingsport and a book for Innsmouth, both of which are weird, creepy towns located just some distance from Arkham. And they're also worth a look. But that is Call of Cthulhu. Definitely one of my favourite, if not my top favourite role-playing games of all time to GM and play. And I certainly recommend you check it out if you're interested. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care, and don't let the night gods get you.